Welcome everyone. Today we're going to paint this rocky seaside with a lighthouse, and I'm going to use a Frederick's 16 by 20 inch gallery wrapped canvas. And I'm going to start out with my 1/2 inch flat brush. I wet it in the jar and I'm using a little bit of matte medium with my Payne's gray. And I want to use the matte medium just so the Payne's gray is nice and transparent. It makes it easy to cover up later. I'm just going to start out by sketching in generally where I want elements. As I start filling those elements in, they do change a little bit, so I'm not set. None of these lines are set in stone. So feel free to, just kind of sketch out where those cliffs are going to go. And I definitely make changes, as you can see, as we go along. So don't feel like you have to get it right the first time. Now I am using this reference image here, and you can download this reference image off of my website. There's a link in the video description below. I just used it as a guide. There were things about it that I really, really liked, and there were things about it that I simplified or changed a little bit to suit my tastes. I'm just going to quickly block in the lighthouse here. I am going to end up painting over it, but I want to make sure that I like the size and the placement, that I'm comfortable sketching it. Just reminding myself of the shape of the cliffs there. And you can make these cliffs as complicated or as simple as you like. Now I'm going to add in the horizon. Notice I'm just kind of sketching it. There's no need to, bust out a ruler and make sure that it's perfectly level or perfectly straight. Just get it on there and you can make changes as you go. Now I'm going to take my 1 inch flat brush. I wet it in my jar, and I'm going to get a mixture of Viridian and raw umber, and then of course some white. Now if you don't have Viridian, it's really the exact same pigment as phthalo green. So if you have phthalo green, you can use that, just use a lot less of it. So Viridian is pretty much the same color, but phthalo green just has so much more pigment that it will take over the entire universe. So just be careful not to use too much of it. I'm going to start laying this in for my ocean. Keeping kind of a soft line on the horizon. By not making the horizon line real sharp, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit off. If it blends into the sky ever so slightly, that takes away that hard, crisp edge that demands perfection. So I'm just laying that in with some horizontal brush strokes in the back there. And I'm going to start lightening it up a little as I get toward the foreground. So I'm really just picking up white at this point. I'm going to change that color so it's got just a little bit more of the green in it, a little less of the brown. The brown kind of grays out the green. And in the foreground, we don't want it quite so grayed out. So quite green there where the ocean's still a little deeper. And more white toward the shore where the water's kind of breaking and creating some spray and waves. And see how easy those Payne's gray lines are to cover. You don't have to worry about those. As long as you don't go, really thick and really solid, they'll easily cover up. Still just picking up white to keep that light right toward the edge of the cliffs. Now I'm picking up more of the raw umber and a little bit of green. I'm back onto my 1/2 inch flat. A little bit of Payne's gray in that mixture. And I'm going to loosely start filling in the rocks. Notice I am using a little bit of matte medium, and here that's really just because I like to use it for blending purposes. There's a couple times throughout the painting where I feel like things will be easier with matte medium, but for the most part, matte medium is not really required for this painting. It definitely makes blending a little bit easier for me. And I like that it makes the paint just a little bit more transparent. By making the paint more transparent, I can make sure that I can see all of the layers through each new layer, and that adds a depth and a life to the painting that you otherwise couldn't get. Otherwise it might just be, it might just look like a single flat layer, and that seems kind of lifeless and uninteresting. To keep a distinction between each different rock feature, I'm changing the mixture ever so slightly. I'm really using the same three colors, the raw umber, the viridian, and the Payne's gray. But for each individual rock feature that I want to remain a separate feature, I'm just changing that color a little bit so that I can see where those features meet. So it just doesn't turn into one big, black blob, so that there remains some definition there. And see that one little piece where I had changed my mind on the shape of the mountain, now there's going to be that Payne's gray line in the sky. But as you'll see, when I go over the sky, it easily covers, so there's no need to worry about that. As I fill in these cliffs and rocks, I'm really not even trying to get everything covered. As you can tell, there's still quite a few places where the white of the canvas is showing through. And I didn't worry about that because I know that I'm going to use several layers on this painting, and eventually all of those white spots will be covered. If you're concerned about that, just use a little bit of an underpainting. Maybe just give it a thin raw umber underpainting over the whole canvas before you start. Since we're using raw umber in just about every part of the painting, that will help with the cohesion of the colors, but also just cover up those white specks so you don't have to struggle with them. And mostly just filling in the areas that I know I want to be very, very dark. So you can see there's big sections that I just left white. I'm going to come back with a different mixture in a minute. And as always, every single week I get a lot of questions about my palette. If you want to know more about my palette and how I made it, find me on Facebook or Instagram. I have a video on each, super quick video to show you how I made it. Essentially, it's just a sheet of glass. That's really all it is. I put a little bit more viridian into this rock here. It's the closest one to us, so I felt like it might have just a little bit more color to it. Just loosely filling it in with a dark mixture. But this rock is mostly going to be orange later. That's the thing that I liked about this reference image the most, was the way that that vibrant orange in the foreground kind of contrasted with the viridian in the rest of the painting. I felt like that was really exciting. So that was the main thing I wanted to keep. Same color mixture now, but I'm adding a little bit of white. It's still pretty dark. And I'm going to start filling in some of those areas I left white. I know nothing looks like rocks just yet, but We'll get it there. Remember that anything can be changed. So, don't try to get it all perfect and in one go. We're going to come back and add lots of layers. The most important thing, though, is not to overwork anything and get just a big gray mess. Each layer will cover the previous one. So if one layer is not working out for you, just leave it. Don't try to correct it. Pull a little bit of those rocky outcrops out into the water. So we might have some little boulders that have broken off that are poking up out of the water, or just little bits of the sea floor that are higher than others. A little bit more green into that lighter mixture for the foreground area. A little bit of a darker color just to create some of those little outcrops and define a couple of rocky areas, kind of separate them from the main ones a bit. I think my best advice for creating rocks like this is not to get too detailed. Don't try to, paint cliffs exactly as you see them in an image. That can get really, really overwhelming. Just look at the overall colors, decide on your colors, and then let it kind of come to you naturally. Look at the image and see basically where are things darker and where are things lighter. And in this image, I felt like the surface of the rocks, like the top edges, were darker, and then the sides that were more vertical, more chunks of rock had broken off, those were a little bit lighter in color. So that's really what I did here. I kept the top darker and then the vertical faces a little bit lighter, and I just stuck with that. Once I decided on that, I didn't look at my photo and try to mimic the textures and colors and individual rocks that I saw there. Like I said, that can get really, really overwhelming. All right, back to my 1 inch, and I'm getting cobalt blue and cadmium yellow medium. And I know that seems like kind of a strange combination for the sky, but I felt like the yellow grayed down that cobalt blue really beautifully. And of course some white so that it's not too dark. In this first layer of blue, I felt like it was way too blue. I didn't want it quite that blue. That's a little bit too sunny day blue. I wanted something that just felt like, it's maybe not a stormy day on the sea, but it's just a little overcast. So I'm adding a little more yellow in there. And I know that looks really green when you're mixing it on your palette, but once you put it on the canvas, in relation to the green of the sea, it doesn't feel very green at all. It looks nice and grayed down. So just mixing those colors right there on the canvas. That felt much better to me. And I'm just going to go over top of the lighthouse. I'm confident that I can do that again. A little bit of extra white for the bottom here. See, keeping that horizon kind of soft. No definite hard line there. Just cut loosely around the edge of those rocks. And this is where I'm going to cover that Payne's gray line. And if your rocks got a little too big and you don't like something you did there, then cut it out with the sky here. A little bit more of that blue-yellow mixture. Because that one corner still felt really bright blue to me, so I want to gray that down a little bit more. Right there. Much better. Just feels like an overcast sky over the sea now. A little matte medium just to help me blend. And a little bit of white just on the very tip of my brush. And I'm going to lighten the horizon there. Maybe there's just a little bit more light coming up underneath the clouds in the distance. And a little lighter over here. All right, back to my 1/2 inch. I'm gonna get my cobalt yellow mixture again, but this time I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of raw umber, just to gray it down a little bit more. I wanna add just a couple spots where it seems like the clouds have a little bit of weight to them. So almost just like a shadow on the bottom, but it's all gonna be very blended. Super light pressure is going to help you get those really smooth blends. Remember that we use heavy pressure to lay paint down, but we use very soft pressure to blend colors together. So heavy pressure there to lay it down, up onto the tippy toe of the brush, and a little bit of matte medium to help blend that out very smoothly. A little matte medium and white, just to make sure it blends into that lighter area. And the sky is done. Sticking with my 1/2 inch, I'm going to get some more Viridian and raw umber. And a bit of white. A little matte medium, and I'm going to just kind of darken the horizon here a bit. It's a little bit of a darker color to kind of create some distance and depth in the water there. And even though that paint is dry, I'm able to make it look like I'm blending into it just by, putting down the darker color and then picking up a tiny hint of white and very gently dusting it out with that light pressure that helps it look like it's blending into that color that's already there. And if you need a little extra help, a little point of matte medium is what's going to help with that. Keep your brush strokes on your C, at least in the distance, very horizontal, very side to side. Make that color a little bit greener, and we'll pull that forward. There's still some of the brown on my brush, but I'm not picking up any extra brown now. A bit of a greener color again, and a little bit lighter, and we're going to deepen this area here. Give us a little bit of a turbulent area where the waves are starting to form. Dust it out with a bit of matte medium and white. It's okay if everything isn't quite as horizontal here. This is where the waves are starting to break. It's closer to us. We can see a little bit more detail. So if it looks a little bit more stirred up and, you know, swoopy and crashy, that's perfect. If it's too flat here, it's going to look very, very placid, and any waves that you have will feel out of place. As it is, I don't have too many big waves. I didn't want it to feel, you know, overly stormy, but I also don't want it to look, you know, like flat glass water. So we've got a little bit of an arc into our brush strokes there. And swooping it up toward the cliffs. A little matte medium on a clean brush. I just picked up white, and here at the cliffs, I'm dusting it up over the edge. See that? You can still see through to the cliffs, so it's adding a little bit of a misty effect. And that's really accomplished with the matte medium. It thins down that white paint so that it's not overly opaque and just covers things. Leave some edges nice and sharp on your rocks, and others cover with the spray. That's going to help give you some dimension in there. Tiny bit of my green-brown mixture. Tiny bit of white. Little matte medium. Still just playing with the depth in the water. I'm not dusting out those brush strokes quite as much, so there's a little bit of extra texture there that I wasn't getting before. See, I'm using much smaller, much softer brush strokes. I'm not trying to get rid of all of the texture. Just picked up a little blob of white there. And gently bringing it up over the edge, the bottom edge of the rocks. Small, light, circular motions there. Notice how I left that edge really sharp on that smaller rock that's poking out. If you dust over all of the vertical edges of your rocks, it's just going to seem like one big blur. So leave some of your vertical edges nice and sharp and make it look like the waves are tucked back between it and the other rocks. I have very little paint on my brush. I'm just picking up the tiniest bits, just giving really subtle texture. We are at a distance here, you know, in the image, so if you put a lot of detail into these waves, it's gonna feel, the perspective is gonna feel off. It's gonna feel like they're a lot closer to you, because remember that as things get further away from you, they also lose detail. So if we get way too detailed here, then our perspective is going to get strange. See, leaving that edge nice and crisp. And just add a few little light bits out here. Not a whole lot. And same here, just a hint of those waves that are coming in a little bit more. All of these rock edges here, I'm leaving nice and crisp. Don't fog over top of these edges, because if you do, it's going to pull everything closer together. It's going to say that those waves are a lot closer than they are, and that's going to make them look very, very tiny. But by keeping that rock edge closest to us very crisp, and those waves very small, we create distance. Just fixing my horizon there, I had a little bit of a bump. And just dragging little hints of that darker color here and there. Same here. Just deepening a couple of little areas. I found quite a few little meditative spaces in this painting, and I gave myself the permission to work on this painting very slowly. I think I did it over at least 3 days, but I want to say I might have worked on it for 4 days. So, you know, I would come into work and I'd work on it for a little bit. And when I kind of felt like that meditative quality was over, like it had ended, then I stopped painting. I really only worked on it when I felt like I could just kind of let go of everything on my mind and just fall into the painting with no other thoughts. So, you know, that's why sometimes when you guys say, well, this took you 2 hours, but it'll take me 2 weeks, or, you know, I'm a much slower painter. That's why I always tell you there's no such thing as a slow painter. Just because you see that my video is 2 hours long doesn't mean that I sat down and accomplished this painting start to finish in 2 hours. There's a lot of things that you don't see that I edit out. You know, there's processing time. A lot of times I start painting and I have to stand back and look at it, or I have to stop painting and take a mental break for 10 minutes or an hour, or, you know, I have to stop and work out something that I'm going to do to make sure that I'm going to do it properly. So there's a lot that you don't see that goes into this. I'm still just picking up little bits of white, working on some of those little detail-y bits in the sea foam. When I sit down to do a painting, I want to find a space where I can just enjoy it and really have it be that meditative experience for me. I don't want to sit down and be like, all right, I gotta knock this painting out in X amount of time or else I'm slow. I have to do this painting in this way or else I've failed or it's bad. You know, if I can enjoy the process and find that little meditative space, I'm much more likely to be happy with my painting. You know, but if I'm stressing over it and trying to force it into a certain time frame or to look a certain way, then I just stress myself out and I don't enjoy it, and I typically don't like the way the painting turned out. So I want you to give yourself that permission too. The permission to work on a painting for as long as you need to, and to stop working on it when it no longer feels relaxing and meditative. Go back to it at a later time. All right, we're gonna stop painting the water for just a couple of minutes. I'm gonna go to my 5/8 inch bright. It's a much softer brush than my 1/2 inch, so we get a little bit more texture out of it. I've got my Payne's Gray, my Raw Umber, and my Viridian. And I'm gonna mix those colors up again in just whatever amount you like. Little matte medium for transparency, and I'm just gonna work on darkening up some spots. Notice I'm not trying to cover everything. I'm still gonna have some of those white canvas spots here when I'm done. But I'm starting to get a little bit of dimension with the first layer of color I added, and now this one. It helps create shadows and highlights very, very effortlessly. Just touching up the shape, the outer edge shape of the cliff. A little bit of white. Just to start working in some highlighted areas. Still kind of just letting the shape of the rocks and the cliffs come to me. I'm not trying to force them into anything. And every time I go back for paint, I just change the color a little bit. There's a lot of colors going on in these cliffs. Also, notice the direction of my brush strokes. I'm really working in two directions. I've got brush strokes that are pretty much vertical. There's a little bit of an angle, but for the most part, they're up and down. And then I've got brush strokes that are pretty much horizontal. Again, there's a little bit of an angle there, but for the most part, everything is up and down or side to side. And that helps create the vertical faces and the top surface of the rocks and cliffs. Just play with those shapes. See how I just pulled that darker, more horizontal edge out, and that feels like the top to me. So I'm gonna pull some lighter horizontal pieces down off of it that feels like a cliff face. And it's really as easy as that. One color going in one direction and another color going in another direction. And that's how you're going to create the illusion of a rock or a mountain. And if you're consistent with those colors, dark is horizontal, light is vertical, then it's going to be very easy to read. If you start mixing it up and you've got dark that goes horizontal and dark that goes vertical and light that goes horizontal and light that goes vertical, too much throughout the painting, it gets really hard to read. But if you notice here, for the most part, my dark is horizontal, my light is vertical. That makes it much easier to read as mountaintops and cliff faces. Here, keeping that sharp, light edge on the left side of that rock pulls it in front of the rock behind it. Darkening that color a little bit for the surface. I'm not going to put a lot of time and attention into this rock back here because I'm going to paint my lighthouse on it, and I'm going to wait and finish up the colors on it after that. But also it's my most distant rock, so I'm not going to see as much detail on it as the other rocks, and that includes detail as far as, where light and shadow is. But I'll do a little bit to it right now. Couple little rocks at the base of the cliffs in the water. felt like there was a disconnect between those two rocks, so I added that lighter vertical area there to kind of connect them. So I hope you see that painting mountains really doesn't have to be complicated. I know it can be super intimidating if you look at a picture of a mountain and see all of the little details and you think, how am I ever gonna, paint believable mountains without painting all of those tiny little details? Either that or you look at it and you think, oh man, how am I gonna paint all of those tiny little details? You don't have to do either of those things. Your brain knows that there's details in there. Your brain understands a lot more than you think it's going to without painting in tiny details. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to connect these distant rocks with the ones that were a little bit closer. So right here, I'm really just kind of experimenting with my brush strokes and my colors and just kind of hoping that everything turns out fine. And in just a minute, you'll see I kind of just let it go. I just move on from that part because I wasn't sure what else to do with it to make it look believable and connected to the scene. And so you can do that. When you're not sure, just move on. Because as you go, you'll start to find ways to connect something based on what you do in other areas. So I just put a little bit of a darker color there for a surface. And now I'm going to move on to this rock, which is closer to us. So this one has all hard edges because that puts it in front of all of those distant rocks. It's got a little bit more detail, but I'm still not getting crazy with the details. And it's going to have a lot of this dark color to it. I also added just a little bit more of the Viridian and clearly less white. Looks like actually no white there. Crisp line where it covers the ocean. Just letting my brush strokes help indicate the shape and the texture of the rock. A little bit of white. And again, mostly vertical brush strokes for the lighter color. I do let it get a little bit more switched up here. So occasionally my lighter colors will go horizontal, my darker colors will go vertical, but there's a lot more texture here, and the smaller brush strokes, the heavier texture, all of those things are going to help pull it closer to us. So it doesn't matter quite as much as in the distant rocks. still just the same 3 colors. We're going to work on this rock, which is our closest element. This rock here is the part of the painting that is the closest to us. I am adding a little bit more of the green to this than I did anywhere else. Going to clean up those edges. We'll put in a few rocks right here that are very distinct, have a very definite shape. And that will help separate the rock on the right from this closer rock. Still not worrying about covering up all of the white spots or anything, just getting my colors in there. I lightened them up just ever so slightly, just a tiny bit of white. Much smaller brush strokes just helps create more texture in this rock. I'm adding quite a bit of matte medium just for glazing purposes. I want to keep that paint nice and transparent, but it's not necessarily required there. All right, still using my 5/8 inch. I wiped off most of the paint and I'm picking up Cad Red Medium and Cad Yellow Medium. There's still that green brown Payne's Gray mixture, so it's a very muddy color, but it's a lot warmer than any of the other colors that I've already used. So it's gonna give us the illusion of orange back here. And I'm just dusting that onto the surface very lightly, just kind of finding where I want that orange mossy color to be. A little extra yellow in the mixture. And we'll kind of try that color out. I ended up, just like the colors we used to create the cliffs and the rock surfaces, I ended up liking this yellower color for my vertical surfaces and the red-orange color for my horizontal surfaces. I was very unsure of how I wanted to apply this color, where I wanted it to be. So what you're seeing me do here is really experimenting. I'm not placing this color, with any amount of confidence or, foresight. I'm just putting it somewhere because I know that if I don't like it there, I can cover it up later. So I just feel confident to kind of play around with these colors right now. Keeping it mostly at this point on the horizontal surfaces. But I'm using a very thin amount of paint. So it's just kind of dry brushing over those colors a bit. And same here. This is that area where I wasn't sure what I wanted to have going on in there, so I'm still just kind of messing around with it, trying to find any kind of a shape that I'm happy with. Here's where I start applying a bit of that yellowish color to the vertical rock faces. Just really dry brushing this color very, very lightly. Now I'm going to go to my number 8 bright. I'm picking up my green-brown mixture, mixing some white into it. Wipe off a tiny bit of that paint. I don't want a huge amount of paint on my brush. And I'm going to start playing with the highlights on the rock faces again. Now that I pretty much know where all of them are, what's going to be my vertical rock faces, I'm just going to work on, adding a hint of detail to them. Very light pressure, just dry brushing. Keeping the bottom edge of the cliff where it meets the water very soft, because that will make it easier to cover with kind of a seafoam look later. If I have a very hard, very thick paint application where the rock meets the water, it's going to be hard to cover up later. There, zoom it in a little bit so you can see how light my pressure is. I have a lot of paint on my brush, but I'm just applying very light pressure and kind of dry brushing some of that color on. Just really that same mixture. It might be a little bit lighter, and dry brushing it on. I like those little streaks that I'm getting. This is kind of an older brush, so my bristles are a little bit puffed out, and that's why I chose it, because as you can see, it gives me more of a sketchy look when I dry brush like that. Helps give a little bit of texture to the rocks. Really just picking up white, but my brush is dirty, so nothing being applied is pure white. I know that yellow was a little bit strange and kind of shocking at first, but I felt like once I started highlighting like this, it pushed it back into the rock a little bit. I definitely didn't cover all of it up. There's still lots of that yellow left in the final painting, but it feels much more cohesive now. But if I went and I applied that yellow and then freaked out and tried to, kick it back, at first I would have lost so much of it. So that's why I say, if you're not sure about something, just let it go. Chances are, in the end, it will work out. As long as you keep going and, don't give up, don't get frustrated, don't, try to attack something into submission. Just let it work itself out. A little of a darker color because I felt like that highlight was not quite right. I want to make sure that I've still got some shadows. So I am adding a little bit of this darker color just where I feel like the rocks are, recessed just a little bit more. Getting rid of any highlights that I felt like were too aggressive or too much. Back to my highlight color, and we'll get a few highlights up here at the top. Probably not as much. I feel like we definitely have more highlights toward the bottom where the rocks are maybe a little bit more newly exposed and definitely taking on more seawater than the rocks up at the top. I'm not even looking at my reference image at this point. I'm just kind of going with what feels right to me at the moment. A little bit of a greener highlight color here for the rocks as they move closer to us. still not quite sure what's going on with this little patch of rock here. I'm still just trying to figure that out. Clean brush, just getting my Payne's Gray and Viridian and Brown mixture. A little bit of matte medium. I want this to be a very transparent mixture, and I'm just glazing in a couple of shadows again. What I end up doing with that little chunk of rock is kind of making it another connection point. So here's where I'm kind of starting it. I'm going to create some sharper edges around it. So it's going to end up being the third closest element to us. But it's starting to get distant. There, pull a little shadow in there, and that helped give it a little bit of shape. And I felt like that's where I really started to kind of realize what shape I wanted for this chunk of rock. Just dashing in a couple more shadows here and there. I think playing with these rock shadows and highlights and shapes is where I spent the vast majority of my time on this painting, but I feel like it was time well spent. I'm really happy with the way these mountains turned out, with the way these rocks turned out. You know, mountains and cliffs, those aren't things that I paint a lot of. I've done some, but most of the paintings that I've done, whether they're videos for you guys or events I've done with my Patreon group or paintings I've done for myself, my large mountain areas have been fairly simple. So this was one of the first real complex mountains I've ever done, and I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. But it's really just because I gave myself the time and the permission to dig down into it and find it. I'm now mixing up my orange color again, keeping it a little more on the red side, and I'm very lightly dry brushing in. I am not applying thick, heavy, opaque paint. See that? I don't have a big load of paint on my brush, and I'm putting very little pressure and just kind of scratching it on there. And I'm going to go do that on most of my horizontal surfaces on these distant rocks. Here I noticed I had the opportunity for another horizontal surface. I had this weird angle with the light color and nothing on top of it. So I'm going to darken up this color a bit and add that little surface to my mountain right here. And see, now it's a rock surface where there was just kind of this weird hole before. I think I'm really just going to kind of stop talking at you for a few minutes and let you watch how this orange develops. And remember, I'm just feeling it out, just finding where I want these colors to be as I go. Same thing on this rock that's starting to get a little bit closer to us, just adding some of our orangey, mossy color here. Clean brush, getting my Payne's Gray green-brown mixture, a little heavier on the Viridian side, a little bit of white. And just going to work on some highlights again in this larger rock. And we'll start putting in a little bit of our orangey color. Again, just mixing that dirty brush into a little bit of the red and yellow. If you go just straight red and yellow, it's going to seem very, very dramatic and very out of place. But by taking that dirty brush and mixing in a little bit of the red and yellow, you get the look of orange because, you know, in context to the green, that color does seem very orange, even though it's just kind of a brown, muddy mess color. You know, sometimes mud is the exact color you're looking for. And in this painting, mud is exactly the color I'm looking for. A little bit of that color brighter, but with more matte medium, so it's nice and transparent. So I've had people say recently that they miss me talking while I paint and, you know, doing a little introduction and everything in my videos. And I'm not sure if I told you, I think I have told you, the reason I haven't been doing that is because the noise level at my studio is really high sometimes, you know, just the sound of people walking around and talking or people working. And it's really hard to record audio in there. And so, you know, I might be able to get in really early in the morning and start talking and recording, but very shortly somebody will come in and, you know, then it's harder to get a clean audio. So that's why I haven't been doing that, but I am hoping to get into my studio quite early one of these days soon so that I can at least record a, you know, an intro for one of my videos and say hello to you and maybe show you around a little bit, but that's why I haven't been doing those things. So now when I record the audio for my video, I have to come home and do it so that I can get a good audio sound. Back to my number 8 bright. It is clean. I'm picking up my green-brown mixture, and I decided that the orange in these distant rocks is way too vivid. It's going to be overly vivid and take away from my closest orange if I leave it like that. So I'm taking this green-brown mixture with a good amount of matte medium, and I'm really just glazing over this orange. So it's still going to appear to be orange, but it's going to dampen that color quite a lot. Remember that as things get farther from us in distance, they lose saturation, especially reds and yellows. Those colors start to dissipate and colors get a little bit more grayed down and darker. So that's what I'm doing here, just glazing those colors. So I'm not losing them entirely, but they become more distant. And this just takes a minute to do. But matte medium is pretty important here for the glazing part, or gloss medium, glazing medium, anything like that. But I know some people don't want to buy a medium, and I can understand not wanting to spend, additional money, but there are some things that you really need to have medium for, and glazing is one of them. Glazing is a really great technique to have. If you know how to glaze, you can change the color of something at a moment's notice. You can get depth and dimension into your painting that you can't get otherwise. And you really need to have a medium for glazing. I'm just loosely and lightly wiping this very transparent green-brown mixture over just about all of this red-yellow. As I come around a little bit closer, I do let the glaze be a little bit more transparent, so I have a very slight shift toward warmer as the rocks come around closer to us. See, now I'm not covering all of the red. Just kind of touching a little bit with this color. Especially here, I'll leave a little bit more of that red showing. And I'm not really going to glaze that other rock at all. Back into my Viridian, Payne's Gray, white, brown, just kind of that muddy, messy sea color. But I want to get it pretty light. One more little dash of highlights on these rocks, and then I believe we're about done with the rocks. Just wanted to get a few pop highlights on there. I think that is about done for these distant rocks. We're going to move on, and I'm going to mix up a tiny bit of our sea color again. The green-brown mixture. Wipe a lot of that off, and I'm going to get some white. I want a very, very pale color with just a hint of that green in it. That's still a little dark, but it will lighten up as I use it. It was also a little too brown, so I kind of greened it down a little bit more. And I'm going to go back to working on those waves, just making sure with these tiny little circular brush strokes that that watercolor is kind of misting over the bottom edge of these rocks. A little bit of a heavier application to indicate some wave shapes or some sea foam or something. I think those little circular brush strokes like I'm doing there help keep it really natural looking. If everything is just kind of an arc, brush stroke, then it's gonna seem like water sloshing in a bathtub. But the little circular brush strokes I'm doing to get kind of that misting effect gives you a very kind of a sea mist look. Heavy white breaking at the base of the rocks. And circular brush strokes to mist it over top of them. Also remember, we're not going to see as much detail in the waves as they get more distant. So those heavy white applications are going to be more in the rocks in the mid distance and closer to us. As I get out toward the back there, I'm mostly focusing on kind of that mist effect, not so much the crisp, heavy white in the water. See how I blur out that heavy white a little bit more there in the distance. And I'm using a little bit more matte medium in those distant areas. Teeny tiny point of white just to lighten it up a little. That's mostly matte medium, so it's just taking some of the paint that's on my brush and depositing it with the medium. So it's very transparent, very quiet. Taking that mist up a little bit higher on those rocks because they're closer to us, and I know you couldn't see that real well, but I'll get you a better shot of that in just a moment. A little bit of a wave crashing there. Just pure white on a clean brush and a little extra water. I'm mixing the water in with the paint there and scooping up as much as I can. And I'm just lightly going to spray a little bit of some specks. You can't see this real well, but I think that it gives just enough of an idea of kind of some, you know, crashing seafoam spray. You don't want it to be too heavy and too splattery, because again, that will mess with the perspective and pull it closer to you than we really want it. Put a little bit of that sea color in there just to indicate that maybe it's grabbing some of the sandy, you know, bottom of the ocean, and there's just a little bit of that color in the waves. Dotting a bit of a heavier white there for some more seafoam. Tiny bit more of that spray. Didn't really show up too much there, but so you could skip that if you wanted to. Pull a little crashing wave up just a tiny bit higher there. It's very abstracted, it's very distant. Mixing it with a little bit more water again. Just white. And I'm going to do a little bit more spray right here where it's a bit closer. And I'm going to pull that mist over this edge of the rock right there where I have a sharp edge. I've decided that part is closer to the water than I have it placed right now. So here with just a very thin amount of white on a clean brush, I'm just gonna dust it over the edge, right there. A little bit more spray right here on the closest area. And then I believe we're going to be done with the ocean. Back to my 5/8 inch bright, and I'm getting my red-yellow mixture. A little bit more on the side of red. Kind of breaking up my brush as much as I can. And I'm going to start laying in this orange mixture, just kind of scrubbing it for now, finding where I want it to be. Definitely not trying to cover all of this dark mixture. I like to smear it and break it up with my fingers. Just gives us some difference in texture. I am kind of looking at my reference image now just for ideas on where to put this color, but I'm not trying to hold myself to making it look like the reference image. Remember that this rock can look like whatever you want. The texture, the way it moves, the way the colors are on it, all of that is however you want. Your rock doesn't have to look like my rock. Your rock doesn't have to look like the reference image. Mine doesn't look like the reference image. You know, it's your painting, so do it however you understand and do it however you feel looks right. I'm going to go a little heavier on the yellow here. I didn't clean off my brush. And some of this first layer of orange is still wet, some of it's dry. It doesn't really matter. Still just working on the colors, trying to find where I want to highlight that orange a little bit more. Being very stabby and sketchy with this brush. That's how we're going to get that nice kind of barnacle-y, mossy texture. Scrubbing a little, stabbing a little, swiping a little, dry brushing a little, wiping it out with my finger. All kinds of techniques to get a variation of textures and shapes and colors, everything. All right, now I'm going to use Fuzzbert. Fuzzbert is just my little scrubbed out number 8 filbert. It doesn't matter what kind or what size. What matters is that it's a relatively small brush that you're comfortable doing a bit of scrubbing with. So I'm mixing up my green, brown, Payne's gray mixture with a hint of white, and I'm going to start finding some texture in the rocks, as well as adding some highlights and shadows. So I'm just kind of scumbling that color on, covering up little bits of the orange to integrate everything into the rock. If some of the orange is too much, I just scrub it out a little bit with this color. Again, I'm doing a little stabbing, a little scrubbing, a little dry brushing. And wipe down a little blob of that color there, and then kind of stab and scumble it out. Again, wiped a blob there, stab and scumble it out. Definitely let any of these colors go outside of that edge that you have, because the more you keep things inside the edge, I think the stiffer the edge is going to look. You know, if you think about if you're standing on a cliff looking over, little bits of rock or grass or moss are going to poke up over the edge and change the overall shape. So see there, I'm intentionally kind of pushing my brush a little outside of that shape. A little bit more white. Let's find a few highlights in those rocks. See, here you can better tell what it is that I'm doing. I'm kind of stippling the paint. A little bit lighter again. Stab that brush to really break up the bristles. Very light pressure there. Mostly keeping this highlight color on the dark areas, not on the orange areas. I like how barnacle-y this rock ended up looking. All right, using Fuzzbert, he's cleaned now, and I'm getting more of my orange mixture. You could use cad orange if you wanted here, but I liked being able to shift it from a redder orange to a yellower orange. So that's why I used the red orange mixture instead of cadmium orange out of the tube. I'm just lightly tapping this color on to get a bit of texture. It's a little bit of a lighter color than I've previously used. I did, however, start to feel like this texture got a little predictable and kind of fuzzy looking. So after a minute, I start scribbling over it. So I believe I've told you guys before, when you find yourself getting a little bit too stiff, making things look too stiff, just scribble over it. Just a little controlled scribble. You don't have to obliterate everything. Just do a small scribble motion to remind your hand to loosen up. And you'll see what I mean here in just a moment. So I'm just gonna go kind of stipple this light color pretty much all over the rock. And then I'm gonna do a little bit of scribbling. A little of that darker red orange, and just kind of stippling in a few shadow areas as well. And here you can see I'm using the same brush, same mixture, but I'm doing a little bit more of a scumbling scrub, just kind of connecting a few of these shapes because I felt like some of them were really separate. It removes just a little bit of that fuzzy look, and I felt like just gave everything a little bit more of a cohesive feel. But I'm scrubbing very lightly. It's a thin amount of paint, so I'm getting a little bit of different colors in there too. Maybe some areas where the moss is a little bit thinner. Keeping some highlights and a little of that texture. But yeah, I felt like that bit of scrubbing was really necessary, and I liked how it changed things and kind of brought them in together a little bit more. So see, when I say scribble something out when you're feeling too stiff, it doesn't mean scribble over the whole thing. You know, show your hand, remind your hand what that little scribble motion feels like, and give it the permission to just do that. A little more stippling and back into the scrubbing. Back to my number 8 bright and my mossy green-brown color. A little matte medium, we're going to kick in our darkest shadows. Just make sure that we've got some areas nice and shadowy. And into some white, because to make our shadows really believable, we have to have some highlights. And I'm just going to lightly scumble in a few highlights. Just picked up a little bit of white there, and I'm just kind of stippling it on for a few of our brighter highlights. And we are just about done with this rock and ready to move on to our lighthouse. All right, I'm back to my 1/2 inch flat. I'm just gonna get some Payne's Gray and some matte medium, nice thin color. This is just like when we were, outlining everything at the beginning. I'm gonna lay in the line for the lighthouse itself, sketch on the little building that's around it, or the big building. It looks like a rather large building. Very simple shapes. Don't worry about drawing. Don't worry about being precise, because you can change it as you go, as you fill it in, and I do end up making some changes. Back to my number 8 bright, getting some red, some brown, a little bit of Payne's Gray, a tiny speck of white, just so it's not transparent. And I'm going to lay in the red brick area of the lighthouse. At this point, I had been painting this painting for a couple of days, and I knew that the video was already going to be really long for you. So I try to simplify the lighthouse as much as possible while still keeping it interesting. But really, if I weren't already bumping up against 2 hours, I probably would have spent at least another couple of minutes, maybe not a lot longer, on the lighthouse, and just put a few highlights on the red brick area. So if that's something you want to do, just add a little bit of a lighter color on the right-hand side. I just grabbed some green on my dirty brush and some white. I'm looking for just kind of a neutrally gray color. So I mixed in some brown, some of the green, some of the red, and I'm going to add the part with the light in it, whatever it's called, the actual part that the light is going to come out of. I'm going to use that same color for this concrete building that's below the lighthouse. So I did try to simplify all of these elements, but I wanted to keep them interesting, so I am going to zoom you in here in a little bit and you know, show you how I did the little windows and things like that. There was a lot of detail in this image, a lot of little details on this building, and I thought to go and do all of those details would be, not only would it be time consuming, but it might take away from the overall image, you know, trying to look at it and determine what all of those little elements are. I felt like it was completely unnecessary. Here I felt like the perspective on this little building was off, so I'm changing the shape of it. Just like I told you, you could easily change the shape of anything. A little bit of a lighter color, because this face of the building is lighter in my image. I loved how this building looked like it was built into the rock. You know, like the rock was, it wasn't just sitting on it, but the rock was kind of, you know, dictating the shape of the walls and where the walkways went and everything. I thought that was really interesting. Just change the shape of this side a little bit again. And remember, just because this is a real place that you can see in a photo doesn't mean that your building has to look just like it. Do what you're comfortable with. And if a part of your building doesn't look right to you, cover it up with a piece of rock. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look like the actual building. Get that lighter color again. I actually end up widening this side of the building. It was way too narrow, I felt like. Put the little dome on the top here. I'm just using the corner of my bright to create just kind of a rounded dome. And then a hint of a darker color, just for a little bit of a shadow on the left side. Speaking of darker color, let's add some Payne's Gray to that mixture and put a shadow on the left side of this area. A little more Payne's Gray, there we go. And a little bit of a darker color for the brick part of the lighthouse. And I'm just dry brushing it onto the left side. See, after I was done, that's what I was talking about. I feel like it could have used a little bit of a highlight on the right-hand side of the brick portion. Gonna put a little bit of a walkway here at the base. People have to be able to get into the building. Pull that bit of the dark wall out just a little bit to give some depth to our walkway, make it seem a little bit more believable. Scumble a little bit of that different color into the side there. And my short liner, just picking up some white. And this is where I'm going to widen that face of the building just a little bit. A little Payne's Gray, a little matte medium. And we're going to make some little windows on our building. And it's just a simple, small brush stroke. Make sure that your brush strokes are pretty much in line. Follow the edge of the building, the top edge of the building, to make sure that they're about level. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just a few little dashes. And one for the doorway right on the walkway. We have like a little ladder that goes to the roof there, so I'm just loosely putting that in, as well as some windows on the side. Just adding little details that I feel like make the building believable. Again, I'm not really looking at my reference image at this point. I'm just adding a few details that I want to see. I'm not getting real crazy with the details though. My windows got a little off there. See, they got crooked. But a slightly damp brush that's clean, and just wipe them out. Just a couple of outlines here with that really thin Payne's Gray white mixture to suggest other elements that might be there. Maybe another little doorway down here. That dark color, it's mostly just Payne's Gray. For a little band there, I'll put the red walkway, or whatever it is, just above that. So this is kind of the shadow for that. Still using my short liner, just picking up the red and putting that just above that shadow color. Hint of Payne's Gray mixed in there so we get a bit of a shadow on the left side. And then I kind of flare the top edge of this walkway a little bit. Tiny bit of Payne's Gray. And I'm just going to suggest like a handrail or something there. A little line there between the dome and the glass part of the lighthouse. And maybe a little antenna. Whatever details you want. I don't even think there is an antenna in my in my reference image. Now I'm mixing up another gray color. I'm just grabbing colors until I get a color that I'm looking for. I want kind of a warm gray. A little bit of Payne's gray in there, and that is about good. I'm going to fill in from the center out. So I'm not filling in this entire area. It's just kind of getting ready for the glow from the lighthouse. Some pure yellow. Kind of smear that in. And some white. Right in the center of the yellow. I just wanted to get rid of that little wobbly line there. All right, back to my bright, my Payne's gray brown mixture, some white. I'm just going to touch up any places on the rocks that I feel like need it, because remember, I didn't do a lot on the rocks here as far as highlights and shadows go. So I'm just kind of reshaping some of them, very, very subtly indicating shape and shadow, and then I'm going to do a very little bit of highlights. So don't worry, I'm not going to spend another 20 minutes on these rocks. I'm just dashing in a tiny bit of a lighter color. And then we really are done with the rocks. All right, back to my short liner. Some white, some matte medium for a very thin, transparent color. And I'm going to scumble in a few extra highlights, which will give this building just a little bit more texture. I'm not worried about being precise. Just put it on and scumble it out or wipe it out with my finger, just so the building looks a little bit weathered. Same thing over here, just a little bit of that lighter color, mostly toward the top edges. Suggestion of it over here. And a darker color. Just a little gray brown. Matte medium, so it's nice and transparent. And I'm going to do a similar thing, just in a few places. I'm going to scumble a bit of this color on and wipe it out with my finger. And that is all there is to this painting. I know it was kind of a long journey, but I appreciate you sticking with me, and I hope that you enjoyed this painting. I know that this was a great painting for me, and I think I might want to paint mountains again soon, so stick around for that. Thank you, as always, to my awesome sponsor, Fredericks, for providing this canvas. These canvases are so incredible to work on, and if you haven't tried them yet, you really should. And don't forget, if you'd like to share your version of this painting with me, find me on Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Painting with Jane and you'll find me. And thank you, as always, to all of you for painting and hanging out with me every single week. I hope to see you next time.